This is the blog post from January 1st, 2020. It includes my favorite recommendations from all those that I made in 2019. During 2019, I emailed 156 art-related items to members of my free Sunday recommendations list. To join, just email me. The address is on the blog post. For supporters, I recommended 52 more items. The items in this post, which are my own particular favorites, include 8 items that were originally shared only with my supporters. All right, under literature, my favorite novel this year was Owen Wister's The Virginian, 1902. This is sometimes counted the first cowboy novel. Its hero is not highly educated, but is nevertheless intelligent, self-confident, honest, and hard-working, and he has impeccable integrity. He has, in fact, the most appealingly American sense of life I've come across for a long time in fiction. This is not a fast-paced story, but I enjoyed spending time with the Virginian, and what I thought were disparate stories, romance and cattle rustling, did come together at the climax. For a sample of what appeals to me, go to the Project Gutenberg version, there's a link in the blog post, and search "It Was Warm, Warm and Beautiful Upon Bear Creek." That will take you to a section where the Virginian is talking to the school teachers he's in love with. Just a note, I listened to the Audible version of this book, which was read by Jack Garrett. The accents were done very well, and I found I actually preferred hearing them to seeing the words spelled out in dialect, as Wister does. And another note on Western movies versus progressive education, see the article There Once Were Giants by John Marini, and thank you to Timothy Sandifer for recommending that to me. Also under literature this year, Henry Kitchell Webster's short story The Painted Scene from 1914. I've given you the link to an audio version. In November 2019, I published the first volume of Henry Kitchell Webster's collected short stories, covering 1901 to 1912. That's the cover on screen now. The Painted Scene will appear in Volume 2 sometime in 2020. Next up, poetry. Which of these is my favorite depends entirely on my mood. Charles Mackay, No Enemies, came to mind while I was working on the Reynolds Affair talk earlier in 2019. Mackay, 1812 to 1889, was a Scottish poet and journalist. Also, Alfred Lord Tennyson's poem Ulysses. The setup is that after fighting in the Trojan War and struggling through a 10-year journey home, Ulysses, who is Odysseus in Greek, has returned to his wife Penelope and son Telemachus at Ithaca, a rugged island off the west coast of Greece. If you think you absolutely positively can't spare the time to read the whole poem, then at least read the last 6 lines. Another poem, it's on the left on this slide, Quent Cordair, To Your You Being You. I think this is a perfect New Year's toast. It's available in his collection My Kingdom. And the last poem is Bayard Taylor's Bedouin Song, written sometime before 1900. The card that I gave my husband when we were married 33 years ago had Bedouin Song and a Kay Nielsen image that is in the center of this slide. 2 poetry-related items, Camille Paglia's Break, Blow, Burn, from which I learned a lot about thinking about poetry, and Burton Braley's autobiography, Pegasus Pulls a Hack, 1934. I sent a lot of excerpts from that to my supporters. Next up, painting and drawing. I didn't include all the names on this slide because it would have taken away the space that I needed for the pictures. Upper left, Maxfield Parrish's Daybreak, 1922. There's actually some dispute over the original colors of this painting, and I've given you links in the blog post to a couple discussions. But whatever its original color was, Daybreak was so immensely popular that within 3 years of its publication, it was estimated that 1 in 4 American homes had a print of it. Learn what made Parrish's work unique and popular, as well as the obstacles he surmounted, in my newly released book, Artist Entrepreneurs, St. Gaudens, McMonnies, and Parrish. At the lower left on this slide is Albert Edelfelt's The Parisienne, also known as Virginie, from 1883. I illustrated Edelfelt's portrait of Louis Pasteur in my post on 5 favorites from the Musée d'Orsay, but I hadn't at that point seen this charming work. Thanks to Ellen Kay for introducing it to me. The original is in Finland. On the bottom row at the center, Sir Thomas Lawrence's The Kalmady Children, which is at the Metropolitan Museum, dates to 1823. Think of the historical, philosophical, and economic progress that led to a famous portraitist creating this charming image of two children born into a family that was neither royal nor noble. The artist once described this as, quote, "my best picture, one of the few I should wish hereafter to be known by," end of quote. At the upper right, Joaquin Sorolla's A Walk on the Beach, 1909. In Invaders in Painting, which is in progress, I know it's slow, I know it better than you do. The last major innovation is the use of color in shadows. Sorolla was an early adopter of this. I usually prefer more precision in paintings, but I love the colors here and the way he captures the motion of the wind and the sea. At the lower right, Han Gan's Night Shining White, a drawing in ink on paper that dates to maybe 750 AD. According to the Metropolitan Museum of Art site, this is, quote, a portrait of a charger of Emperor, I will not attempt to pronounce his name. With its burning eye, flaring nostrils, and dancing hoofs, the fiery tempered horse epitomizes Chinese myths about Central Asian celestial seeds that sweated blood and were actually dragons in disguise, end of quote. The technique of the drawing is a lovely reminder that the innovations of the artists who created cave paintings, including shading for form and variations to indicate texture, continued to be essential for all those who wanted to represent reality in two dimensions. And the final painting at top center is Arthur Frank Matthews' Monterey Cypress, California, painted around 1930. Now and then, when temperatures are not hitting 105 degrees there, I miss California. Works such as this one slake my thirst. Matthews, who lived 1860 to 1945, is credited with bringing the arts and crafts movement to California. This painting is at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. The Metropolitan Museum has his Afternoon Among the Cypresses, dating to circa 1905 or 6. The largest collection of Matthews' works is at the Oakland Museum. This year I saw exhibitions of the works of several great illustrators. N.C. Wyeth, he's at the upper right, J.C. Leyendecker at the upper left, and Alphonse Mucha at the center. The links in the blog post will take you to my albums of these exhibitions on Facebook. If you're looking for depressing, I guess you'll just have to go somewhere else. No, wait. Leonardo's St. Jerome, which was on exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum for a few months in 2019, is depressing as a subject, although it would have been a great work of art had he finished it. I wrote about it in detail in a link that is in the blog post. Sculpture. Walter Schatz's Untermeyer Fountain is at the upper left. It dates soon before 1910, and it is one of my favorite sculptures in Central Park, or in Manhattan for that matter. Daniel Chester French's The Continents is at the Customs House at the lower end of Manhattan. It dates to 1907. I'm giving you just the figure of America, which happens to be my favorite. But the blog post, to which there is a link in this blog post, will show you all of the figures. Third is Veiled Dancer at the Metropolitan Museum. She dates to the 3rd to 2nd century BC. She is the second from the left on the top row. Since I first saw a photo of this in Jansen's History of Art 40-something years ago, I've been fascinated by it. Although the figure is heavily veiled, you can tell she's dancing by the twist of her spine, the angles of her elbows, the tilt of her head, and the slight lift of her foot. You can even tell she's turning to her right by the way the fabric of her robe drags behind her. Until the 4th century BC, sculptures were meant to be seen head-on, even if they weren't against walls or in niches. But you can move around this 8-inch tall sculpture an inch at a time and always find a satisfying new angle or detail to look at. One of the most amazing anniversary gifts my husband ever gave me was a reproduction of this piece. and it's still sitting in my living room. At the moment, the reproduction isn't listed in the Metropolitan Museum's shop, but that might change, so you should check if you like it. Next up, Danielle Anjou's Gratitude 2 and the Hammer Thrower, the 2 at the top right. Last July, when I walked into Quint Cordair Fine Art before giving my Artist Entrepreneurs talk, I was blown away by this artist, whose works I hadn't even seen before. There's a link to more of Anjou's work in the blog post. Another one I love this year is Zinos Frodakis' Freedom from 2000. That's on the lower row in the center. And finally, at the lower right, Renée Chambellan with Jacques Delamare, the City of Opportunity reliefs from the north and east entrance vestibules of the Channon Building in Manhattan, right across from Grand Central. These date to 1927 to 1929. These 8 gilt-painted plaster reliefs were sculpted at the same period as Lee Lowry's Atlas at Rockefeller Center. Like Atlas, all these figures are exerting force, but because their heads are in the right proportion to their bodies and they're looking where they're going, they seem to be moving with purpose rather than just exercising their muscles. The reliefs symbolically portray aspects of the City of Opportunity: effort, activity, endurance, enlightenment, vision, courage, achievement, and success. According to a contemporary account, they tell, quote, the story of a city in which it is possible for a man to rise from a humble station to wealth and influence by sheer power of his mind and hands. End of quote. That's from a 1929 article quoted in the Landmarks Preservation Report on the Channon Building. And a little bonus, this year I had a tour of the Modern Art Foundry in New York, where I watched bronze sculptures being cast, and it was fascinating. There's a link in this blog post to the blog post that has pictures of that. Next up is music. First up, classical, including opera. I recommended Bach's Double Concerto, the Concerto for 2 violins, dating to 1717. I also mentioned Ludwig van Beethoven's Ninth Symphony from 1824. There's a link in this blog post to a discussion of the best recordings. This is one of my favorite symphonies, but I've listened to it so often that it's difficult to hear it fresh. To give me a new perspective, authors such as Harvey Sachs are invaluable. His The Ninth, Beethoven in the World in 1824 was published in 2010. Sachs puts Beethoven and the Ninth into their original context. He also mentions in passing less familiar works that I'm now eager to listen to again. My least favorite part of the book is Sachs's description of Beethoven's character. Like Michelangelo, Beethoven must have been a difficult man to deal with. But like Michelangelo, what he produced has brightened my life more times than I can count. Another music recommendation, Verdi's, I'm not going to try the Italian. It's an aria from Don Carlo, dating to 1867. One of my favorite discussions of literature is Leonard Peikoff's Great Plays course, which includes a lecture on Schiller's Don Carlos. As it happens, my first experience really understanding the basics of opera, how the music, lyrics, acting, and sets all work together, was listening to Sandra Schwartz's talk about Don Carlo, and then seeing the opera on video. This aria from Don Carlo is still one of my favorites in the operatic repertoire, for the music and for the aspiration. The setup is that the King of Spain, King Philip of Spain, has married the woman his son Carlo was in love with. Carlo, with his friend the Marquis of Posa, resolves to go to Flanders and lead the revolution for liberty and against oppressive Spanish rule. The link is to a performance by a great tenor, Placido Domingo, and a great conductor, James Levine. Let's not do the baby bathwater thing. And there is an impressive set as well. It's Metropolitan Opera 1983. The video has subtitles, but I recommend listening to it first without reading them because the content is very religious. I'm also giving you links in the blog post to Peikoff's Great Plays course, which is available now in the original audio or as an ebook. No, I'm sorry, as a book. And bonus under the music section, I found a video of Gerard Schwartz explaining the basics of conducting, which was just fascinating. All right, next section, Broadway and popular music. First, Anthem, which first came out in 1988. Not every song needs to be taken literally. I think of this one as a song about loyalty to ideas that matter to you, to the country of the heart, as it were. And I tear up every time I hear it. This is from the Broadway show Chess, with music by Benny Andersson and Björn Ulvaeus of the pop group ABBA, and lyrics by Tim Rice. The blog post has links to a 1988 video with David Carroll, who originated the role that this piece belongs to, and a more recent, higher quality video with Roderick Dixon, who's illustrated in the upper left on this slide. Second recommendation in this category, Into the Fire, 1997. This is my favorite Courage Under Fire song. 2 years ago, I wrote up the Scarlet Pimpernel musical for Genius.com, and the Genius pages on the Scarlet Pimpernel have gotten more than 7,000 views, which probably makes them some of my most popular writing. And third recommendation in this category, the album Louis Armstrong Meets Oscar Peterson from 1957. This is one of my favorite Armstrong albums. It's a great pick-me-up when you're tired of Christmas carols, for instance. Video, including movies and TV series. Trouble in Paradise, 1932, is a charming romantic comedy directed by Ernst Lubitsch, with beautiful people, costumes and sets, and witty dialogue. In 100 Voices, Harry Binswanger mentions it as a movie that Ayn Rand particularly liked. Second movie, Meet Joe Black from 1998. Anthony Hopkins is an admirable businessman, and Brad Pitt is death come for a visit. I always thought of Pitt as just another pretty face, but he can really act, and he and Hopkins together are just a delight to watch. IMDb tells me this is a remake of the 1934 Death Takes a Holiday, but I haven't seen that one. Third movie this year is Rocket Man from 2019. Days after seeing this movie, I was still humming Elton John's music. The film is a musical fantasy rather than a documentary. John was the executive producer, and his husband was co-producer, so no, this is not a smear job. It covers 20 years of his youth, his rise to fame, and his addiction and recovery. Elton John and Bernie Taupin comment on the film's accuracy in a New York Times article that I've given you the link to. Taron Egerton, I don't know how you say that, who plays Elton John, did a wonderful job, and he did actually sing the songs. On the innovations used in sound mixing, I've given you a link to an article. Don't miss the credits where stills from the movie are juxtaposed with stills from John's career. And in TV series, The Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, which ran from 2015 to 2019. This Netflix series has unique and hilarious characters who never give up, but who carry on in unexpected ways. Kimmy missed a decade or more of popular culture, and her commentary on what she sees when she moves to New York is very refreshing. This is written by Tina Fey and Robert Carlock, and stars Ellie Kemper, Jane Krakowski, Titus Burgess, and Carol Kane. Moving on to architecture. I did a blog post early in the year on the Brooklyn and Manhattan Bridges at Dawn, 2019. That's a picture from it on the left. I am fascinated by the spiral staircase at Melk Abbey, which dates to the early 18th century. The current version of Melk Abbey, which is built in the High Baroque style, towers on a cliff above the Danube River in Austria. The staircase that goes from one level of the library to the other is absolutely stunning. I also listed among my favorites the Ladies' Pavilion in Central Park by Jacob Ray Mould, which dates to 1871. And it is wrought iron. Possibly cast iron. I'm not sure. Fourth architecture recommendation I haven't given you the pictures from because I don't have any that are not copyright. It is by George B. Post, dates to 1875, and it was originally built as the Williamsburg Savings Bank. Recently it was refurbished to its original glory and transformed into a magnificent event space. Next up, decorative arts. 3 items on this one. The first is Carlo Bugatti's writing desk around 1902. What would you be inspired to write at this fantastically ornamented Art Nouveau desk? The writing surface is vellum, which is parchment. The decorations are copper and pewter over walnut. It is at the Metropolitan Museum. Carlo Bugatti, incidentally, is the father of Ettore Bugatti, whose name will be familiar if you're a vintage auto fan. In the center of this slide is Jordan's ruby and diamond pendant from 1744. I have thought-provoking and inspiring art everywhere in my home except by my desk, because when I look up from my computer to work out a thought, that kind of art distracts me. So instead I keep images such as this piece of jewelry from the Green Vault in Dresden. It's gorgeous enough and complicated enough to hold my interest. If my brain's stuck in a loop, I count the rubies and diamonds or study how the jeweler made it not quite radially symmetrical. I could probably get the same effect from a William Morris wallpaper, but the postcard that I have of this was given to me by my daughter, so it's got fond memories attached. And the third among the decorative arts, this brooch by Marcus & Company, which dates to around 1900. I saw it at the Metropolitan Museum's Jewelry for America exhibition. Plique à jour, which is the technique of this, is an enamel and metal technique that allows light to shine through the enamel. So think of stained glass on the scale of jewelry. The skill and the beauty of this 3-inch high piece leave me speechless. For other gorgeous samples of plique à jour, see the links on my blog post. And there's an interesting comment from someone who's been creating plique à jour pieces for 25 years. Quote, "A small demi-tasse cup takes approximately 40 hours to make, so for heaven's sake, pre-design well. You don't want to spend all that time and have a clunker on your hands. I personally rely on Japanese kimono designs. They're compact, well thought out, and do very well. You will be repeating the design ad nauseum, so make it pretty. The world and work has no need for more ugly things. Design well." And finally, under the heading Nonfiction, I listened this year to Tara Smith's lecture To Imagine a Heaven and How Sense of Life Can Help You to Claim It. It's a talk from 2011. Dale F. recommended this to me, and in turn, I highly recommend it to you. And just wrapping up, in 2019 I published 2 books of my own, one on artist entrepreneurs and the other on Alexander Hamilton and the Reynolds Affair. I also published 2 books by Henry Kitchell Webster, one a novel and the other a collection of his short stories. And there are dozens of videos on YouTube, which you can get to by way of my website. For more of my writing, see the chronological list on the Books and Essays page on DianeDurantewriter.com. DianeDurantewriter.com also has hundreds of posts on sculpture, painting, Central Park, and my many other obsessions. To join the free Sunday recommendations email list, visit the URL online or email me. If you're a member of the list, you will get emails that include links to all the things that I'm referring to so briefly here. You can also say, "Well done, Diane," or support my work and receive rewards by means of the tip jar on DianeDurantewriter.com. Thank you, as always, for listening.